Keir Starmer has returned from the US, and he did not persuade, it seems, the US to agree with him that he should give Ukraine permission to fire Storm Shadow missiles into Russian territory. Vladimir Putin says that would be direct war with NATO. It's not the first time he has said this. And I am joined by Christopher Steele, former head of the MI6 Russia desk, but now director of Orbis Business Intelligence. Thanks for joining me, Christopher. How worried are you right now about escalation?
Hi there, Anushka. Good to be with you. I'm not particularly worried about escalation because we've been through these situations before. If you remember, when it was discussed that the West would supply long-range artillery, tanks, and indeed aircraft to the Ukrainians, Putin made similar threats. And of course, there is an element of bluff here and of gambling on both sides. But the balance,
pretty high stakes gamble, isn't it?
It is a gamble, but it's a gamble that's needed because Putin is the one that's actually been escalating this war of late. If you saw in the news last week, the Russians have just obtained around 200 short-range ballistic missiles from Iran, which could be used very significantly, both on the battlefield and to attack civilian targets in Ukraine. And there's also a big, long shopping list being agreed between Russia and North Korea, we understand, for missiles of even longer range. So we can't sit back and allow Putin to escalate the war, threaten us, and allow him to get the upper hand, because it's absolutely vital that Ukrainians prevail in this conflict for our future security in Europe.
But what you're just saying there is an axis which is very scary for people. You're talking about North Korea, Iran, who reportedly have had nuclear support from Russia in return for the missiles they're providing, and Russia. We have a very live situation in Ukraine. Some people worried that Ukraine can't win this war. We have an American presidential campaign where we could see Donald Trump as president by the end of the year. If Trump wins, what do you think that will mean for all of this?
Well, I certainly think the American election is a very significant issue on the future of the war and indeed on Ukrainian policy. And of course, this is the one thing that Western politicians and indeed Zelenskyy and others can't really discuss in public for fear of offending Trump in case he gets into office. But I can tell you that the Ukrainians in particular are watching the American election campaign extremely carefully, because they know that if Trump were to be elected and were to follow the so-called peace plan that Viktor Orban of Hungary has been promoting, probably at Putin's behest, it would effectively hand victory. They would be forced to hand victory to Putin and to Russia by ceding about 20% of their territory and being forced to accept neutrality going forward, which would not be in their interests.
So it'd be quite worrying if there was a change.
It would be extremely worrying, yes.
And right now, do you agree with the 5 former defence secretaries in the UK then that Ukraine should be given permission to use the Storm Shadow missiles as they please, regardless of what the US is saying?
Yes, I think we would have to keep a close eye on what targets they were being used against. But the Russians are very clever at using sort of standoff capability behind their own borders. And that's a very significant threat to Ukraine. I also think one thing that hasn't been discussed very much is China's position in all this. China in general is against escalation in the war, doesn't like the war in Ukraine. And in particular, we understand, has told Putin and Russia that under no circumstances should they resort to nuclear weapons. Now, that is a very significant thing because China is the key country now for Putin and Russia and effectively their survival, both economically and politically in the world. So I think that's, again, quite reassuring, really, in overall terms.